Hey everyone, welcome back to English Inside Out. I'm Mark. You know, I've been thinking about something lately that sounds positive on the surface. But honestly, it can be kind of destructive. Trying to be perfect. And I don't mean doing your best. I don't mean caring about quality. That's healthy. I'm talking about that constant internal pressure that says, this isn't good enough yet. That voice that makes you reread the same email 5 times before sending it. That makes you record a video. Delete it. Record it again. Delete it again. That makes you hesitate before speaking, because the sentence isn't structured perfectly in your head. It looks like high standards, but sometimes it's just fear wearing a nice outfit.
Hi everyone, I'm Anna, and I already feel called out by this topic. Because perfectionism doesn't usually show up dramatically. It shows up quietly. It shows up as, I just want to improve it a little more, or let me fix this one small thing. And suddenly an hour passes. And you're still adjusting something that was already good. I've done this with simple things, like writing a caption, or preparing for a meeting, or even choosing what to say in a normal conversation. You start editing yourself in real time. You start filtering every sentence. And instead of being present, you're managing your image. And that's exhausting.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that perfectionism often makes us slower, not better. We think it's helping us succeed. But sometimes it's just delaying us from starting. You don't apply because your resume isn't perfect. You don't post because the lighting isn't perfect. You don't speak because your English isn't perfect. So you wait, and wait, and wait, and life doesn't wait.
And I think the hardest part is this. Perfection feels responsible. It feels mature. It feels ambitious. But there's a thin line between striving for excellence and being trapped by unrealistic standards. And today, we're going to talk about that line. Because maybe the problem isn't that you're not good enough. Maybe the problem is that you're trying to be flawless. Okay, so let's talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough. Perfectionism and procrastination look like opposites, but they're actually very connected. Because most people think procrastination happens when you don't care. But sometimes, you procrastinate because you care too much. You don't start the project because you want it to be amazing. You don't send the proposal because it needs to be flawless. You don't post the video because it has to be impressive. And if you can't guarantee that level of perfection, you freeze.
Yes, that freeze is real. I've experienced this so many times. I'll have an idea, something I'm genuinely excited about. And instead of starting immediately, I start planning excessively. I research. I outline. I reorganize the outline. I think about the perfect structure. And it feels productive. It feels like I'm working. But I'm not actually moving forward. I'm just trying to reduce the risk of imperfection. And sometimes that planning phase becomes a hiding place.
That's such a good way to describe it, a hiding place. Because starting something means exposing yourself. It means creating something that can be judged. But if it stays in your head, it's still perfect. In your mind, the idea is flawless. The future version of you is flawless. The project is flawless. The moment you start, reality enters the picture. And reality is messy.
And here's the irony. The longer you wait for the perfect moment to begin, the heavier the task feels. Because now, it's not just a simple project. It's this big, important thing that has to justify all the time you spent delaying it. So the pressure increases, which makes you delay even more. It becomes a cycle.
I see this a lot with language learners too. Someone will say, I'll start speaking when my grammar is better. But grammar improves by speaking, not by waiting. Or they'll say, I don't want to sound silly, but sounding silly is part of the process. Perfectionism tells you, wait until you're ready. Growth tells you, you become ready by starting.
And sometimes procrastination isn't laziness. It's fear of discovering your limits. If you try and it's not perfect, then you have proof that you're not perfect. But if you don't try, your potential stays untouched, untested. And in a strange way, that feels safer.
Yes, because as long as you haven't started, you can still believe that you could do it perfectly. Perfectionism protects your ego, but it blocks your progress. And over time, that protection starts costing you confidence.
So maybe the question isn't, why am I procrastinating? Maybe it's, what am I afraid won't be perfect? So if perfectionism creates all this pressure, where does it actually start? Because nobody wakes up at 25 years old and randomly decides, you know what? I'm going to attach my self-worth to flawless performance. It usually starts much earlier, and not always in obvious ways. Sometimes it starts with praise.
Yes, that's such an important point. When you grow up hearing things like, you're so smart, you're the responsible one, you always do things right, it sounds positive. And it is positive. But as a child, you start building an identity around that. You're not just someone who did well, you're the one who does well. And suddenly, making mistakes doesn't feel like a normal part of learning. It feels like you're breaking character.
Exactly. And then there's validation. When love, attention, or approval feels connected to performance, even subtly, your brain makes a connection. Good grades, praise. Winning, attention. Doing things right, feeling valued. So you start chasing that feeling. And over time, doing well turns into never failing.
And we also can't ignore comparison. Especially now, you open social media and everyone looks accomplished, productive, confident, polished. You see the finished product, the promotion, the transformation, the perfect English speaker, but you don't see the messy middle. So you compare your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel, and the gap makes you feel like you need to do more. Be better, try harder, be perfect.
Yeah. And perfectionism often grows in environments where mistakes feel unsafe. Maybe you were corrected harshly. Maybe you were teased. Maybe you felt embarrassed once. And that memory stuck. Your brain is very efficient at avoiding pain. So it creates a rule. If I'm perfect, I'm safe. Safe from criticism. Safe from rejection. Safe from shame.
But here's the problem with that rule. Perfection is impossible. So if your sense of safety depends on something impossible, you're always slightly anxious, always slightly tense, always scanning for what could go wrong. And that's exhausting.
And I think for a lot of people, perfectionism isn't really about high standards. It's about control. If everything is perfect, nothing can surprise you. If everything is flawless, no one can criticize you. It feels like protection, but it slowly turns into pressure.
And the hardest part is realizing that what once protected you might now be limiting you, because as a child, trying to be perfect might have helped you feel accepted. But as an adult, it can stop you from experimenting, risking, growing. The strategy doesn't match the stage of life anymore.
So maybe perfectionism isn't a personality trait. Maybe it's an old survival strategy.
Okay? So if perfectionism is an old survival strategy, something we learned to feel safe, valued, accepted, how do we actually loosen its grip? Because it's not like you wake up one day and say, all right, I'm done being a perfectionist. It's much more subtle than that. And I think the first shift is this: separating your worth from your performance. You are not your output. You are not your productivity. You are not the quality of your last presentation, post, or sentence in English. When your identity is fused with performance, every small mistake feels personal. But when you separate the two, mistakes become data, not drama.
That's huge, because perfectionism makes everything mean something about you. If the project isn't perfect, you're not good enough. If your English isn't flawless, you're not intelligent enough. If the video doesn't perform well, you're not talented enough. But most of the time, the result just means you're in process. And process is allowed to look messy. I've started asking myself a different question when I catch perfectionism showing up. Instead of, is this perfect? I ask, is this clear enough? Or, is this helpful enough? That tiny shift lowers the pressure immediately.
Yes, enough is such a powerful word. Perfection has no finish line, but enough does. When something is good enough to serve its purpose, you release it. You send the email. You publish the video. You speak the sentence. And then you let reality refine you, because feedback, not perfection, is what actually improves you.
And we also have to normalize imperfection publicly. The first few times you post something that isn't polished, it feels uncomfortable. The first time you speak up without rehearsing everything, it feels risky. But every time you survive that discomfort, your brain learns something new. I can be imperfect and still be okay. That's freedom.
And maybe this is the biggest reframe. Perfectionism promises safety, but it often delivers paralysis. Action feels risky, but it builds confidence. Confidence doesn't come from getting everything right. It comes from realizing you can handle getting things wrong.
So, maybe letting go of perfection isn't about lowering your standards. It's about changing your timeline. You stop demanding perfection before action. You allow improvement after action. That's a completely different rhythm.
And if you're listening right now and thinking, okay, but this is hard for me, that's normal. Perfectionism probably helped you at some point. So don't attack it. Just outgrow it. You don't need to destroy the part of you that wants excellence. You just need to stop letting it control when you begin.
Maybe the goal isn't to stop caring. Maybe the goal is to care and move anyway. You know, something I've realized is that perfection is a moving target. The version of perfect you're chasing today would have terrified the version of you from 5 years ago. And 5 years from now, today's standard won't even seem that impressive. So if perfection keeps evolving, when exactly do you allow yourself to feel proud? When do you rest? When do you say, this is enough? Because if you keep raising the bar every time you reach it, you never actually arrive anywhere.
And I think that's the quiet tragedy of perfectionism. You can achieve something meaningful, something you worked really hard for, and instead of celebrating, your mind jumps straight to, okay, but what's next? How can I improve this? This could have been better. There's no space to breathe. And life is not meant to be one long performance review.
Imagine living in a way where you're allowed to try without mastering immediately, where you're allowed to speak without rehearsing perfectly, where you're allowed to create without over-editing your humanity out of it. That doesn't mean being careless. It means being real.
Because at the end of the day, people don't connect to perfection. They connect to honesty, to effort, to growth. No one relates to flawless, but everyone relates to trying.
So maybe the next time that voice says, it's not ready yet, you pause, and instead of asking, is this perfect? You ask, is this brave enough? Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let something be seen before it's polished.
You don't need to be perfect to move forward. You just need to begin.
And maybe the life you want isn't waiting for a perfect version of you. It's waiting for the real one.
Thank you for spending this time with us today. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who might be quietly carrying that pressure too.
And this week, try one imperfect action. Send it, say it, start it, and let that be enough.